Fernando Rizo, what is your favorite game?
My favorite game is XCOM Enemy Unknown, the 1994 one. Not that I don't love the new one, but the 1994 one is my favorite game.
That's a good solid intro. I like that. Good solid intro. Precise, clear, to the point.
I try to avoid ambiguity as much as possible.
Good.
I mean, how did I first get into playing games? I mean, I was a kid who moved around a lot, and as a result, I was always a kid sort of new in the neighborhood, weird accent, so probably had a harder time making friends than a lot of other kids. So my friends were books and computers, right? My dad got us because I'm old, so we had like an old Texas Instruments computer in the early 80s, and the first thing I wanted to do was figure out how to play games on it. And to my dad's credit, him too, right? My dad also wanted to figure out how to play games on it. So my dad and I would play games like Parsec and stuff on that old Texas Instruments machine. And we graduated to a Nintendo Entertainment System, and Sega Genesis, and then started building PCs and stuff. So my dad was kind of my partner in crime for a lot of this stuff. But I also did things like I'd buy tabletop games and play them by myself, and play games solitaire and stuff. So I basically have always loved games, and always knew that I wanted to kind of work my way into the games industry somehow. But I spent a lot of time playing games as a kid, and when XCOM came out, I guess I was 14 or 15, and it was just kind of an incredible revelation for me. I'd never played anything like it, and I still play it now, 10 billion years later, every once in a while, because it lives in my brain rent free, and always will.
What sort of, you mentioned the sort of how you and your father just sort of really into games. Like, were there any games that you would sort of play together?
Yeah, I mean, my dad and I played a lot of games on my own for sure in my free time. But when my dad was around, my dad would want to play games with me, and like Legend of Zelda on NES, which is not a multiplayer game, right? Like most of the games my dad and I played together were not multiplayer games. But like we played the original Legend of Zelda on the NES together, and we would do that by, my dad basically just sitting next to me, thinking, "Oh, have you tried this? Have you gone this way?" Kind of oohing and aahing as I made my way through the dungeons and the overworld and stuff. Like games that had a lot of puzzles were great for me and my dad, because they would be a thing that we could crack together. And it was great. I have a lot of really fond memories of playing games with my pops, and I think it's still an important part of my relationship with him. Like we still, I buy him a game every couple of years, because that's the other thing. My dad's, I don't know if that's a thing of his generation or of just my dad, but like he goes through games at this glacial pace. Like I bought him StarCraft 1 in like 1999 or whatever that was, and he played StarCraft 1 for like 5 years. Right? So I don't need to, and like not multiplayer, right? Like my dad wasn't like an esports champ at StarCraft. He was just playing the campaign over and over again. So Yeah,
I'm
it's
guessing I
always
can
been a part of
get.
our relationship.
I'm guessing you didn't buy him StarCraft 2 until like Legacy of the Void had come out, and even then
I
it's
still
still
haven't
taking
even
its
bought
time.
him it. Yeah, no, haven't even had to go there yet. I should. That's a good idea for his birthday, Johnny. I'm gonna get him StarCraft too.
There we go. So something sorted for his birthday anyway. Very good,
Yeah,
very good choice. Anyway, StarCraft 2. I really love that game, or at least while I played of it. Anyway, I still yet to touch any of the expansions.
that's okay. My dad will get to the expansion sometime around 2040. If he's still alive. So don't worry, you'll beat him to it, I'm sure.
Would it be fair to say that it was during that period where was it him that sort of introduced you to strategy games like XCOM, or even stuff like something along the lines of, say, a StarCraft, or games like them?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure now if I came into strategy games independently and Dad came along, or if he introduced me to them. I mean, I think the first strategy game, computer game anyway, that got played a lot in our house. Well, actually, no, I take it back. We played a lot of strategy games on the NES, and on the Genesis, They're Koei, the Japanese publisher Koei,
Yeah.
made tons of great strategy games for Nintendo and for Sega Genesis. Like Aerobiz, where you ran an airline and stuff. I played the hell out of that. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was me that got Dad into strategy games or the other way around. But not to jump ahead, but playing XCOM, my dad and I also treated XCOM and still do like a multiplayer game, right? Sitting down, I'll sit and watch him play and be like, oh, here's what you should do in this situation, Dad. And then he'll ignore me and get his guys all killed or whatever. But we still do that. We still, even now in our advanced age, we'll still play single player strategy games together when I'm home with my dad.
I'm just picturing the two of you just sort of having a multiplayer match of Civilization.
It would be so weird because we've never done it, right?
Really? I would have figured you would have done it by now.
No, that's it. We play board games. We play Twilight Struggle and stuff every once in a while when I'm home. But that's it. We don't tend to compete against each other. We tend to just be a consultant for the other one. Basically, that's our experience of playing games together.
So not even stuff like co-op on recent games?
No. I mean, because the thing is, right? For a guy who's been into computers as long as he is, my dad isn't super tech savvy, so I feel the process of getting him into an online multiplayer match of Civ might be too onerous for him. I think he might get frustrated and give up. But you know what? We should try it. Actually, we should try it.
Go for it. There cannot be at the borderline worst. There cannot be a scenario where it doesn't come out at least funny and hilarious.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, that could be a spin-off podcast for you. My dad and I playing Civ.
That would be a good spin-off podcast. Pitch me on that if you got a proper idea.
I might do. I just opened a Word doc. How I got into the games industry, my career is weird and serpentine, and I always kind of struggle to articulate how I got into the industry, and I never want people to try and follow my career path, because I got into the games industry through sheer luck and just brutish determination, I think. I started sort of my professional career in marketing, advertising, PR. I worked for agencies in New York and in London, and I was pretty good at that. But agency life is hard. Very high stress, it's very high pressure, and nobody really kind of lasts forever in that world unless you're a proper masochist, and I wasn't really, unfortunately. So after 10 years in kind of marketing and PR agencies, advertising agencies, I I told my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, I told her, look, I'm gonna quit my job, and I've got some money, a little bit of money. I'm going to take that money and I'm going to live off of it while I try to brute force my way into the games industry because I know that I'm a great game designer. And she said, okay, that sounds like a terrible idea, but all right, go do that. So I did that because I knew I was an amazing game designer, and I designed some games and made them, and no one bought them because they were terrible, and I realized, oh shit, I'm not a great game designer after all, as it turns out. But I had, I had this deep love for the business, and I had all of this PR and advertising experience, and really the specialty that I had kind of fallen into in the agency world was pitching. Like I was my agency's pitch doctor. Like, you know, if you were pitching for Lee Jeans or Kodak or eBay, you know, they'd fly me out to go coach the pitch team and help them get the pitch ready. So the thing that I realized was that pitching is also a fundamental part of the games business, and a lot of folks are kind of clueless on how to do it. So once I realized that I wasn't a very good game designer, I thought, well, I could go into business development for indie studios, and I could help them pitch publishers, pitch platforms, help them negotiate contracts. You know, one of the funny things about the indie games sort of milieu is that there is a tendency for people to wear lots of hats, right? Like you look at some indie studios and, you know, one guy's the level designer and the sound designer and the writer and the cutscene director, and somebody else, she'll be the 3D modeler and the composer, right? Like everybody wears 10 hats. But when it comes to the business side of things, like the getting a game ready to pitch and pitching the game out and then working out contract stuff with publishers, it's so millions of miles away from the stuff that you're good at if you're a good game developer. You might as well bring in somebody who's specialized in that to handle that for you. So I did that, I think, pretty successfully for a number of years for a lot of great indie studios like Miklo Studio in France and 2x2 Games in Croatia and that sort of thing. So so that's kind of how I got into indie games, and I'm still here now with running Modern Wolf, publishing great strategy games from all over the world, and having a lot of fun doing it. So that's me in a nutshell, really.
And splash damage in the middle of that, obviously, as well.
Splash damage in the middle of that, yeah. So I mean, I was very lucky to spend a few years at Splash. Seeing how the AAA side of things worked, seeing how the co-development side of things worked. I mean, while we were there, we worked on Halo Master Chief Collection and Gears Tactics, a bunch of other stuff that's still so secret I can't talk about it. I was the marketing director when we shut down Dirty Bomb. So that was, I wouldn't call it a fun experience, but it was interesting and definitely edifying to have to sort of take a game out behind the woodshed and put it to sleep, right? So that was an interesting challenge from a marketing standpoint. Hopefully I don't have to do that again, but I definitely learned from that. But like Splash was a great studio, and I made a lot of friends there. I still have a lot of friends there. It's a wonderful place. And I have just the greatest admiration for all those guys.
And how much of that time now from Splash and elsewhere just sort of helped inspire you to sort of set up Modern Wolf? Well, we already did that big long form piece on Playhouse about sort of how the genesis sort of, or well, not the genesis, but sort of ethos of what Modern Wolf is. But like,
yeah,
how much did those sort of experiences sort of impact and influence what would become Modern Wolf?
Oh, I mean, just tons, right? I mean, I think at Modern Wolf we are trying to be good guys, and we're trying to be ethical capitalists, which I
You
know
said
is
this is so. I'm just going to jump in here. This is something he said when we did that interview last year, or not even last
yeah
year. It's a year and a
2 years
half ago
ago.
now. Like at this point, when we did that interview at EGX, he said ethical capitalists, and I just burst out laughing when he said it the first time. It's just like, that's a very good way of just basically selling modern world ethical capitalism.
I mean, look, like there's I'm not I'm not a slavish devotee of capitalism for sure. Like I definitely see it for what it is, right? And I think and look, the objective of Modern Wolf, like the objective of any company, is to stay in business and make money. And absolutely we're trying to do that because, my investors would get very nervous if I wasn't. But, I think and the people that work with me truly believe that the way to run a sustainable business in the long term is to treat people like people, be stand up in your practices, and create sustainable relationships, right? That doesn't mean you don't mess things up. That doesn't mean that we haven't had to make hard choices. We have, of course, we have, right? But we definitely are trying not to be predators. And I covered this a bit when we talked at EGX way back when, but like the fact that most indie devs don't work with the same publisher twice tells you a lot about the state of the relationship between devs and publishers. And I think it's wasteful, frankly, right? Like you spend a lot of time getting to know a studio and the devs there, making a game together. It stands to reason that if you make a second game with them, that game will be better because your relationship is stronger. If you make a third game, even more so. So the ethos of Modern Wolf is definitely rooted in the squishy, bleeding heart, liberal place that I come from, but it's also got an underpinning of logic and business to it, right? Like I genuinely think that we'll be a better business long term because we take good care of our devs and we try to cultivate long-term relationships with them. So ask me in 5 years if it works.
And it's funny as well that you mentioned how there's very few indie devs, sticking around with publishers for a second or third pop at the cherry. I find that fascinating because the thing that springs to mind immediately is how after we did that interview at EGX, I don't know how long ago it was after, maybe 3 or 6 months after, where after the success of Sayonara Wild Hearts, Simogul basically signed with Annapurna for another game or two, basically for a multi-year deal. Like,
I mean, I hear nothing. I hear nothing but good things about Annapurna. And I've talked to some of the guys there a couple of times. And I get a great vibe from them. I don't think we have a monopoly on trying to be good, ethical publishers. I think a lot of Annapurna are trying to do that. I know the Raw Fury guys are like most of the folks I talk to. Nobody thinks they're a bad guy, right? It's just that I think for us it's sort of front and center to who we are, and it's good. I mean, if lots of other publishers are doing that, then that's only a good thing for the industry, I think.
I don't know which side this episode is coming out on, but we have Kelsey Hansen of Annapurna coming on, and I'm just sort of reminded how much basically the both of us basically gushed over Annapurna at EGX at this point.
No, I mean they remain one of my favorite publishers, right? Like
they are my favorite publisher right now at this point. Like it's
they everything they seem to have a great nose for games because everything they announce, I look at and go, shit, that's a winner.
I mean, it goes back to what we talked about at EGX. Like, not everything is going to, because like you mentioned it yourself in terms of Paradox, not every game is going to personally attract to me, but about 99.9% of it definitely is. That feels like the same for me with Annapurna.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the crazy thing, right? Like, they're starting, like, they're sort of their catchment area is getting wider, right? Like they're doing stuff like Due Process that is such a departure from their other titles, but it feels right in their catalog, and I think it's probably easier to maintain that catalog discipline where, hey, we're about this, when you're doing it by genre the way Paradox does and the way we're kind of trying to. The way Annapurna does it is kind of the way Devolver used to do it, where it's not all one genre, but it has a feel to it, and it's hard to articulate precisely what that means, but you know it when you see it, right? Yeah, no, they're doing really good stuff, Annapurna.
So, let us talk about your favorite game, XCOM
Yes.
Enemy Unknown, 1994. We're not talking about the 2012 version yet. We will talk about it, but not as, the focal point of this episode. So, this is actually the second time we've actually covered this game on the show.
Oh, wow.
We did. So, when was the last time we did it? I think it was about nearly 6 years ago now, for season 2. So, this is the first time we've had the 94 version, the Gollop version, since then. So it's interesting to sort of go back and talk about it again, and still not really have done a whole lot of legwork on it in terms of playing it, because I'm a Solomon person, but we'll get that. Anyway, I can somewhat partially attest to Fernando's sort of passion for XCOM, because we mentioned the interview that we did back at EGX a few years ago now, for a site, and how you mentioned how XCOM was your favorite game, and I just realized, you know what, I should bring this guy on for my favorite game, because it'd be good.
Well, here we are 2 years
here
later.
we are a year and a half to 2 years
A year
later.
and a half, yes. Yep. Yeah, I guess, XCOM has always been my favorite. I don't think that answer has changed much since it came out, really.
Amazing. Like 26, 27. Oh dear sweet Jesus, I'm old now. I'm old.
Let's see, what is it? 26 years ago. Yes, that came out. Yeah.
I am very old. I think this is the first episode of my favorite game I've recorded since I turned 30. I'm just like, oh, fuck me.
We're talking about a game that's old enough to buy, like, health insurance.
Oh, fuck no! Don't say that!
We are indeed.
Fuck!
It's only slightly older than you. Or only slightly younger than you, so yeah.
Oh, dear God, no.
So don't talk to me about being old.
No.
Oh.
Oh, God, no. This is gonna turn me into dust. Practically like Peter Parker in Infinity War.
Oh, no. Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Stark.
I don't feel so well. We did sort of allude to this at the start of the show. Just sort of talking about how you first sort of got into strategy games. But around the time XCOM 94 came out, it did feel like it was a sort of golden era for the genre at that time, because you did have XCOM, but like Civilization just sort of starting to come into the world a little bit more, and then you had Laser Squad as well before what came with XCOM from Julian Gollop, and obviously as well Syndicate as well, from Molyneux and Bullfrog, pre Starbreeze turning it into admittedly pretty decent FPS, but all the same, talk about that golden era, because like it is very, it feels very prevalent. I don't know, very prominent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was probably just a function of who owned PCs then, right? If you owned a PC in the early '90s, you were probably slightly older, unless you were, a young nerd like me at the time. Like the I guess just the audience for PC games probably skewed older, and as a result, probably gravitated more towards slightly slower paced games. I think the rise of PCs as a platform for action games probably crosses over with sort of the proliferation of PCs kind of in the post Windows 95 world, where there's PCs in not in every home, but certainly in more homes, and they're more accessible and they're less sort of hobbyist, I guess. So, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely feels like there was a golden age for strategy games then. Definitely, Civ 2, Civ 3, XCOM, the Bullfrog games, which were often strategy games, not always, but often for sure. And yeah, it's weird because I remember when, and you might remember this too. I remember there was a 2K XCOM game announced in the sort of early 2000s. Do you remember this one? And it was a shooter.
Oh, this is Jordan Thomas's game.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
it eventually turned into The Bureau. And it had a very stylish trailer.
Yes, I do remember.
And I remember that trailer came out, and we all watched it at, like 300 by 40 by 100 or whatever resolution we watched trailers at back then. And everybody that remembered XCOM from back in the day said, "What the heck is this? Not XCOM.
What the fuck is this?"
Yeah.
I was basically the opposite of basically what you were probably reacting as. I was just basically going, "Oh my god, I am so down for this." Whereas you probably thought, "What?"
It was an objectively cool trailer. Yeah, it was an objectively cool trailer, and I think if they hadn't saddled it with the XCOM IP, I think it probably would have been universally beloved. But I think the thing that I remember, and the reason I bring it up, is because after the backlash, some 2K, I think this was like on an earnings call even, somebody asked 2K, like, so why isn't XCOM, the new XCOM strategy game? And they said, well, strategy games just aren't contemporary anymore. And that person was probably right at the time. It definitely felt like strategy games sort of got shunted off into the sort of hobbyist, non-mainstream kind of. This was pre-indie games, but there weren't a lot of big strategy games, and the idea of sort of AAA strategy games probably didn't really come around until Civ 5 again. And I think we're in a renaissance now for sure, right? Like the XCOM reboot, the Jake Solomon XCOM reboot, which is excellent, and XCOM 2, those games sat on the top of the Steam top sellers list consistently since they came out. Like, there's definitely a huge, like, 2K and Sega with the Warhammer games and the Football Manager titles, right? Like, they've proven that there's a big audience for strategy games. They are very contemporary. So Modern Wolf is very much trying to be, an indie strategy publisher that serves that, I think, underserved market of folks who love these sorts of games. Because there's definitely, I think the XCOM reboots probably showed a lot of folks that, hey, turn-based tactics games can be fun. And I think they unshackled what was probably an old, less sexy genre from a lot of people's preconceptions. And yeah, I think honestly, like right now, it's the best time in the history of the planet to be someone who likes computer strategy games, right? So yeah, I think we're in a good place. But yeah, XCOM definitely belongs to that golden era from the 90s, definitely.
It's funny that you did mention that 2010 reboot of XCOM, because I was actually just thinking about it today before we started doing this. But the funny thing is, I was just thinking something else in relation to it. And that, believe it or not, is Prey. Like the arcane version of Prey.
Oh, yeah, I played it.
Like, it feels very different to what it previously was. Because, like, with XCOM, I did think of it, yes, but like my memories of that trailer are a bit skewed now. But I
Oh,
just think back to the sort of, for whatever reason, I just think of Prey now whenever I do sort of, when I did unlock that memory in my head because it feels so unfamiliar. But at the same time, there is that sort of part of me that really wanted to see what that version would have looked like, especially considering how that game was announced a few months after Bioshock 2 it came out.
oh, right.
And especially because it was Jordan Thomas. And I think what I'm trying to get at is, how do you make a game that is now very different from what came before? Not necessarily between XCOM 94 and what would have been, let's say, for the lack of a better expression, the immersive sim that 2K Marin was going to put out.
Yeah.
Like, let's say between the 94 version of XCOM and the 2012
Yeah,
XCOM.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
how do you sort of... Uh, no, I've lost my complete train of thought.
How do you capture what made the original work?
How it made the original basically work, and then just sort of how does then the reinterpretation of that later down the line, like with Enemy Unknown 2012, sort of capture that as well.
I mean, I think it's a cool question, and really, the 2K Marin immersive sim that got half canceled, half sort of transmogrified into the Bureau or whatever happened to it. The funny thing is, I think that might have worked if folks had given it a chance, right? Like, it wouldn't have. All right, let me back up. I think the thing that makes 1994 XCOM so durable, and I don't blame you for not going back and playing it now, because it's a pain to play, right? The UI is so outdated. The whole user experience is so onerous, right? If you didn't have like a deep emotional connection to it, the way those of us who played it back in the 90s did, I can't imagine anybody would play it now, right? It's so intense and clicky, right? Everything that you want to do takes 4 or 5 clicks. But the reason the game survives, I think, in my minds and the minds of its fans all over the world, is because it was an immersive sim in its own way, right? We talk about immersive sims like Deus Ex and the arcade games because I think it's very easy. Well, it's not easy. I think it's relatively straightforward to make an immersive sim as a first-person shooter because it mimics your experience of the world. It's very easy to sort of inhabit the world. So you're walking around in it. You pick up notepads. You open doors with keypads by punching the numbers in. Right? It feels true to life. XCOM absolutely tried to do that. Right? But it tried to do it. It tried to make you a weird bureaucrat, right? Like you were not a soldier in the XCOM project. You weren't an agent going around shooting aliens. You were the administrator. And it was up to you to hire and train the soldiers and equip them and make sure that your sponsor nations were happy and funding you. And, an integral part of the game was reviewing graphs of reports that someone had collated for you of alien activity around the world and making sure that you were dealing with the threats in Colombia so you wouldn't lose funding from that country, right? And it really succeeded. It really succeeded in that immersion. I think folks don't talk about immersion in strategy games that much because they're so kind of cerebral and frequently their perspective gives you a literal detachment from the subjects, right? You're not viewing it through their eyes, you're seeing it from overhead usually. But in XCOM, like, you're seeing it from overhead because you're the administrator. You're the boss. That is how you would see the action. And that's when the report comes across your desk. That is exactly how you would see it. So
Basically like your battlefield commander in a way, like your general, like just
Yeah.
basically sort of going around basically.
Yeah, precisely. And it's if the 2K game, the 2K Marin game, if it had been an immersive sim that, put you into some role, not necessarily the role of the commander or the administrator, but if it had been an immersive sim, I think it probably could have captured some of that XCOM magic, even though the gameplay was quite different. But that's also the thing I think that the Firaxis reboots do so well, right? They change a lot of stuff about the mechanics, but they change them in a way that modernizes and streamlines them in a good way, right? Like that, it is onerous to play 94 XCOM. It's not to play 2012 XCOM or XCOM 2. It's very they're a joy to play. It's got a great UX and it's super straightforward and accessible to their credit. But it preserves that feeling, right? That feeling of mystery, that dread of what's around the corner, the shock and amazement when you find a new alien you haven't run into before. All of that, they capture all of that beautifully. And yeah, I've got nothing but good things to say about the reboots. They're really fantastic.
How do you think the old XCOM, for what it was able to do at the time, managed to sort of provide that sort of mystery to it?
Yeah, I mean, it was part of it was just the game was so deeply strange in its designs, the alien designs and whatnot, right? It was really plowing its own furrow in a way that you don't see that much anymore, right? Like, I wonder, like, if someone pitched me 1994 XCOM now and I was completely ignorant of the source material, I would probably look at it and go, all of these aliens are so wacky and different. Like, it's hard to kind of imagine that they're all part of the same, invasion force, the same conspiracy. What draws them together, right? The game was so brave about having this big kaleidoscope of weird aliens, scary aliens too, that your first playthrough of XCOM, or your first couple of playthroughs as you get a little further each time, like, there was a real sense of like awe and wonder, right? Like when you see an alien that you've never seen before appear on the map, it would scare you, right? Because you don't know what it's gonna do. Will this one, fly through the air and snipe my guys from a distance? Will it, run up and implant them with an egg the way the alien xenomorphs do, right? Like all of these things are within the spectrum of possibility in 1994 XCOM, right? So like it was that great diversity of monsters, I think, that gave it that ability to surprise you. Just like, because games were so relatively low fidelity back then, you could make an enormous array of content for them relatively easily, right? Like you're only just making little pixel dudes. So it was just chock full of stuff, and there was always new stuff to find.
And you mentioned that sort of horror as well, and like tying that back in with something else that you said as well, like that horror, of just feeling like you sort of mentioned it, like that sort of horror of what's going to happen to my crewmates, these teammates of mine that I've invested so much time with, I've invested into them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just in case they die or something dramatic happens to them, it's like, no.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You feel actually really attached to them as well, especially if they're characters that you helped create.
Absolutely, right? And I think that really is part of the core experience. And again, that is something that the Firaxis reboots do so well, right? They give you lots of customization options for the troops, so that to really build that kind of emotional bond with them. And you will make tactically unsound decisions based on your affection for the characters, right? Like you will do things that are probably the objectively wrong thing to do because you want to save your troops, which is great. Like that is a fun problem, I think, for the strategy game player, and I think it's a testament to how effective the game is. I mean, I back in the '90s, you would get the officially licensed strategy guides for games, usually made by like Prima and stuff. And I remember buying the XCOM official strategy game guide. And the guy who wrote the strategy guide obviously loved XCOM a lot, but he was ruthless in a way that I couldn't be, right? And so like, there's an alien. One of the aliens in XCOM is the chrysalid, which you'll know from the reboot. And the chrysalid has only a melee attack, but if it melee attacks your guy, it turns your soldier into a zombie, and after a couple of turns, that zombie turns into another chrysalid. So the number of chrysalids on the map can explode quite quickly, right? And so sometimes in the 1994 XCOM, you'll get called to, like in the reboot, you'll get called to a terror site, and the terror site's full of civilians. And I remember reading in the strategy guide, so this guy is writing about, if you have chrysalids at a terror site full of civilians, the smartest thing you can do is to kill every civilian you see. Just level the map, bring the heaviest weapons you have, just flatten the entire map and you will win. You'll take a score penalty for killing civilians, but just remember, and this is exactly what it said, every civilian is a potential chrysalid. And I remember reading that and thinking, I don't play XCOM like you, pal.
Right? Sentimentalism.
No, but like that. I mean, that to me it just shows you, I think, what an effective game XCOM is, right? Because it can create that kind of emotional response in us. Yeah, it's yeah, I love it.
It's amazing when you put it like that. Like just it's probably the only game where you probably think like, yeah, fuck these civilians, fuck them, they die,
Right,
die.
sorry, for the greater good, you all have to die. Like, that's the thing, like, it's probably
For the greater
like morally,
good.
Yeah, it's like a morally
That's
defensible
just sort of like
position,
that
I
sort
don't
of
choose to take. Yeah.
just sort of like that Hot Fuzz mentality for the greater good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Just to sort of go back slightly, you mentioned how as well that back in the 90s, like a lot of PC players were like the skewed slower games like XCOM. What do you think
Yeah,
that is?
I'm way out over my skis. I don't have any actual
Ah.
data to back that up, but I'm pretty sure it's right.
well, not mindset then. Like, why do you think that is?
Oh, brother, I'll tell you, it's because we're getting slower. I mean, it's no question about it, right? I in my early 30s, I played tons of Battlefield, and a fair bit of Counter-Strike. And nowadays, I'll buy the new Battlefield out of brand loyalty, I guess. I'll dive into the multiplayer for a week. I'll get my butt absolutely handed to me by younger, faster, quicker thinking, quicker fingered players, and then I'll think, all right, time to go back to Crusader Kings 3, I guess. I think that's definitely part of it, right? I mean, it's also that as I get older, I find that I want less adrenaline out of my games. And when I play games, it is to exercise my brain a little differently and to unwind and not to let off steam in the same way, I guess. That's my hypothesis, anyway.
There's a bit of a... It's definitely a lot more noticeable in something like the Bureau, anyway. But it feels like there is definitely somewhat of a G-Man mentality in the strategy XCOM games as well. But like, at least certainly from the Firaxis XCOM games, there's definitely an element there. And with Marin's game that came out a few years later, that is more prevalent because that's the main focus of the game. But in terms of the original XCOM, like, how much was that a focus?
I don't know really, because the thing the thing about XCOM is that it's not really a power fantasy, at least not at first, right? Like you are the the kind of extraordinary thing that the game manages to do is that it puts you into situations where you are hopelessly outclassed all the time, and somehow we didn't all collectively bounce off of that in frustration. I'm not sure a game could get away with it today because I think expectations are different. But the first few times, your first few missions in XCOM, you're gonna get hosed because your weapons are paltry relative to the aliens' weapons, and especially the first few times you're playing, you don't know how these aliens behave, right? The aliens behave uh, in unexpected ways. They have abilities that aren't immediately apparent. So if you're going into the game completely fresh, you don't know what's going on. So you're really an underdog. You're really an underdog in XCOM, slowly fighting your way up to eventually achieve parity with the aliens. But you're never a powerful sort of authority figure kind of imposing your will onto the game. Really, you're always up against it, and you're always you're fighting a losing battle, right? That if you don't make some audacious moves to finish the game, you will lose, right? Um, so that to me sort of, yeah, it never feels like a power fantasy the way a modern first person shooter does, where you're the Superman mowing down hundreds of people and shrugging off injuries. It's a game where you're gonna lose a lot, and that's part of the appeal, I think.
It's funny that you mentioned that sort of win-lose mentality of it's it's a massive factor of those XCOM games because at the end of the day, it is still a game of chance.
Yeah, there's definitely quite a bit of RNG in it.
And I guess in trying to tie that into a question, it's more of a sort of how do you sort of struggle with, not struggle, but like how do you sort of come to terms with the fact that it could either just go anyway, either way, basically.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think part of that is just that I think to some extent consumer tastes have evolved since the game came out. To some extent, it's it's definitely it's a game where you can do everything right and still lose. I guess. I think partly because of that power imbalance, right? Where the aliens are much more powerful than you, and if you don't keep up with the power progression, like they will just leave you in the dust. And I think, yeah, I think in 1994, I think that was probably plenty controversial in 1994, right? Because I think there's a big group of folks like me who remember XCOM very fondly and loved it. I don't think it was a world-changing commercial success back in 1994. So it's possible that this was not even a great formula even then. But yeah.
Well, why do you think it was not as great a success commercially as it probably should have been?
Well, I mean, it's an inaccessible game. It's a tough game. It's there's no tutorial. You have to read the manual. The manual is pretty thick. I can still remember the manual very, very clearly. Right? It was like a little trade paperback book about the size of a postcard and probably a third of an inch, half an inch thick. It was it's an intimidating game. It's an intimidating game, and I remember I had friends who played PC games in 1994 in school, and I remember making copies of the floppy disks as you did back then, and giving the floppy disk to my friend, saying, "Listen, you got to play this. It's absolutely amazing." And no one that I gave the game to had any pleasure from it at all, right? Everybody gave it back to me and said this game sucks. So it's it's an acquired taste. It's not for everybody, and I can understand why you would bounce off it, right? It's really hard. It's really unforgiving. All of the stuff that we've just been talking about, right? About how unforgiving it is, how there isn't really much of a power fantasy there, that you're always an underdog. I think it was Tom Chick from Quarter to Three who described, like, the ideal strategy game AI is one that loses gracefully, right? Like, what people ultimately want out of a strategy game is to win, and they want the AI to put a convincing fight up, but they want to win, and XCOM is a game where you can lose, no question about it, and even if you do win, which, I don't want to make out that it's the hardest game in the world. It's very possible to win XCOM. I've done it plenty of times, and I'm not a genius or even close. But even when you do win, there's going to be ups and downs. And there's going to be setbacks, and I think most people don't want that kind of experience out of a game. I think people play games for escapism, for to live out power fantasies, and to be powerful and to win, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, no. That's what games do for folks, and that's what I want quite a lot of the time. But when I want that challenge from something like XCOM, nothing else will do, really.
Let's touch on properly then the modern XCOM games and what Firaxis has done over the last 9 years with the original XCOM, that game's expansion, XCOM 2, and the more recent XCOM that came out. When was it? It was about a year or two ago, anyway.
It was last spring.
Chimera Squad.
March or April. Yeah.
What Firaxis has managed to do in terms of providing such fresh life into those games, like, it goes without saying, but I never got to play the original XCOM because, like you say, it's now very inaccessible, not just probably in terms of playing it, but, like, it's very hard to sort of get hold of. From what I understand, anyway. But, like, when 2012 XCOM came out, this was still, like, a few years after what we were thinking 2K Marin's game was going to be this big, massive, first-person immersive sim from Jordan Thomas off the back of Bioshock 2, rather than what it was going to become as a third-person shooter with the Bureau. XCOM, for me, feels like not just so much a brand new way to explore that world, but just so much a brand new way to explore the sort of what I'll call the thinking game. The thinking game in which you really need to be on your toes here mentally in terms of the decisions you make, your strategies and stuff like that there. Like,
yes.
How do you think those games have sort of dealt with those things, as well as upholding the legacy of what came before with the original XCOM?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have enough kind of praise to lavish on the reboots. Really, I think they're masterpieces, and two especially for me. XCOM 2, the sequel, I think, is kind of the high watermark of the entire series. I mean, you invited me onto the show to talk about my favorite game, and it's definitely XCOM from 1994, but that is at least 50% down to nostalgia and emotional attachment, right? Like, I think objectively speaking, I think the XCOM reboots are better games. What Jake and the Firaxis guys did, right? They took a very sort of Sid Meier-y approach to XCOM, and they said, because the original XCOM is it is excuse me, it is a simulation game, right? It is a simulation that attempts to model as realistically as possible all of the aspects of running this big, multinational uh, defense organization, right? You have a budget. You every dollar you get comes from your sponsor nations. On the battlefield, every soldier has time units that model their speed, and every step they take reduces their time units by a certain amount based on the terrain they're moving through. Right? It's a very crunchy, detailed simulation game. Um, and the XCOM reboot is not, right. The XCOM reboot is a tabletop game in
Yeah,
many ways.
yeah.
It's about chunky Sid Meier style interesting decisions where the the decision space is a bit more limited in some ways, but the decisions are more interesting. And um, I think personally, as a piece of game design, that's probably a superior game. And the what they did was in changing the game mechanically to be more of a board game. Really, they did that whilst preserving the spirit and the feel of the original. You are still that underdog fighting, hopelessly outclassed, fighting these aliens. You are exploring into the unknown and being afraid and discovering new aliens and uh, getting attached to your troops and creating a narrative about their actions in a way that the game now supports explicitly, right? With medals and promotions and little skill trees for the troops, and troop customization, right? So it's, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on, but I think it is a beautiful refinement of the XCOM formula in a way that is sort of classic Firaxis and classic sort of Sid Meier school of strategy game design. But it's also done by people who just freaking love the original XCOM, and they understood what made it great, and they carried those aspects of the game forward into the reboots beautifully.
Mm. How do you think Jake Solomon and his team sort of learned from I mean, like, I guess you sort of alluded to it there, but like, how do you think sort of Jake Solomon's team sort of learned off the sort of school of thought of Sid Meier, the Civilization franchise as well, and then brought
Yeah.
that into the modern XCOM games? Like, how do you think that sort of conversation went down when they were first sort of outlining these new modern games?
Well, I think you can see it to a certain extent from the outside, right? Like there's a, no single episode of any podcast is long enough to talk about the Sid Meier School of Game Design comprehensively, right? But there's a couple of, things that from from Sid Meier games, right? Like one of the things that Sid always says is that there's kind of no point in creating little modifiers that give you plus 10% this or plus 5 that. Like Sid always says, double it, have it, or don't do anything, right? Make big chunky numbers that people understand. Like, what's the point? Like, I think one of, like, the marquee probably example of this, in the original XCOM, every soldier has time units. And time units determine how far they can move, how many times they can shoot in a turn, right? And so, like, a soldier has 80 time units, let's say, every turn. And walking one tile of normal terrain costs 4 time units. And walking one tile of challenging terrain, like a wheat field, costs 6 or 8 time units. I don't remember exactly. You can already see that in order to plan out your turn for this one soldier, and you might have 8 or 12 or 16 in your squad, you have to do some pretty crunchy math, right?
Yeah.
So you have to think, okay, it's going to cost me 24 time units to get from here to there, which maybe leaves me enough time to shoot. I've got to, you're doing a lot of arithmetic. If you are, not playing by the seat of your pants, which you certainly can do. But if you're planning your turns out, it's a lot of sort of processor time for your brain in the original XCOM. And so you can see the Sid Meier approach in the new XCOM, right? Time units, forget it, they're gone. No more time units, no more of that. Now every soldier gets 2 actions. 2 actions every turn, and you can use both of those actions to move, and you can move really far. Shh, quiet, Siri. you, you can use both of those actions to move, or you can move and then shoot, right? Or you can shoot and not move, and it uses both of your actions, right? Now, planning your turn gets really simple, because you mouse over your soldier, you see how far they can move, and now you can and even things like reducing the squad size, right? So like in the default XCOM, the Sky Ranger, which is the default transport plane you have at the beginning of original XCOM, it holds 14 people, right? So you land in your first mission to go fight some aliens, and you've got 14 people to move around, which is a lot of people. Every turn takes a while when you're moving 14 people around. And so the reboot XCOM gives you 4 people. So 4 people plus 2 actions for each of those every turn. That's a smaller, much more easy to grasp amount of information and planning. And I think that's what makes XCOM so successful, right? You've seen a lot of folks have tried to kind of capture some of what made XCOM so great. There's been a real renaissance in turn-based tactics games, which, look, it's my favorite genre. I think that's delightful. But the thing that a lot of them kind of fail to grasp is that the reason the XCOM reboot is so accessible and has sold millions of units is because it's very easy to grasp, right? And it's very streamlined, and it's not in a way that reduces complexity, because it's still a very complex game, but you don't have to break out your graphing calculator to figure out what you're going to do this turn, right?
I think the way you sort of described it there, more than anything, it's that way to sort of sum up at least the newer XCOM games, is that it's very much a numbers game as well.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like it's honestly the best way to sort of describe it, because you're not just so much thinking in terms of where to go, how do I keep my team alive. You're adding math to complexion as well. Again, it's basically a numbers game as well.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true, right? Like, XCOM is a very sexy presentation layer on top of a bunch of dice rolls, basically. Right?
So basically, XCOM is a D&D game.
Yeah, I think if you want to think about it that way, sure. I think that's about right. I mean, and really, to get back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, like, how do you deal with the RNG? Like the thing that XCOM, I think, when you get good at XCOM, the thing that you, and I'm probably average at XCOM, I would say, but like when you start to get good at the game, it's when you realize that I need to plan around failure, right? Like, if everything is riding on this one shot and this one dice roll, you're either in a desperate situation or you've done something terribly wrong, or both, right? So it's about good planning and foresight, I guess, as much as anything.
It's interesting that we sort of discussed the school of thought between how Jake Solomon does XCOM and sort of how he's brought that sort of line of thinking over from Sid Meier.
Yeah.
But another sort of question I want to ask in relation to that is, how does what Jake Solomon does, what does he pull from the Julian Gollop school of thought when it comes to designing games like XCOM, the original XCOM, and then bringing that over to new XCOM?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the thing that the Gollop brothers and the Julian Gollop kind of had with that original XCOM was that incredible atmosphere and those wonderful themes, right? Like the fact that XCOM doesn't lean on any discernible kind of tropes, or even a unified theme for its aliens, I think is kind of a masterstroke, because the incredible diversity and the capacity to surprise that you get from those aliens, right? Like, it still feels fresh, like, to me, and fresh and interesting, what is it, 20 odd, 30 odd years later. it's that is very much present in the new XCOM, right? Like that great diversity in the roster of the aliens, and the interesting kind of emergent problems you need to solve when there's a mix of aliens kind of on the battlefield. That's definitely, brought whole cloth from the original XCOM. And, as much as the sort of minute to minute gameplay is very different because it's more Sid Meier-y and less simulation-y, the whole package, right, is still very much, I think, in line with what Julian Gollub was trying to accomplish. And the second one, right, XCOM 2, which is so thematically different, right, and for folks who haven't played it, the reboots, XCOM 2 does this really bold thing, and it starts by postulating that you lost XCOM 1, right? So you lost, the aliens took over, and now you're fighting a guerrilla war, right? And it takes that underdog feeling that was definitely present in 94 XCOM and the reboot 2012 XCOM, and it makes it now even more explicit, and it puts that to the forefront. Now you literally are scrappy underdogs fighting an insurgency against this bigger, better equipped alien force. And I think, yeah, if like, that's obviously very different, I think, from the themes of the first game, but it captures that feeling that the first game gave you and kind of takes it to its logical extreme, and it's great. It's really good. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of Julian Gollub still in those games, I think.
Bringing up Julian Gollub again, like I had mentioned obviously as well, Phoenix Point as sort of spiritual successor to what came before with XCOM. Like, how did you find that?
I mean, it kind of pains me to say this, but I didn't like it very much, and I think I mean, I was super excited about it. I Kickstarted, or it wasn't on Kickstarter, it was on Fig, I think. Yeah, I gave.
I think it was on Kickstarter. I think I vaguely remember it being on.
No,
Kickstarter.
it was on Fig. It was on Fig, the other crowdsourcing platform. I seem to remember because I had to sign up for a Fig account. I don't think I've done any before or since. But yeah, whatever it was crowdfunded. I definitely kicked in for it, and yeah, I mean, to me, I think it just sort of highlighted the extent to which that 1994 design had fallen out of step with what you expect from a game these days, right? Like, it went back to... It was very much a simulation, right? And not an abstracted game. And as a result, it was a bit fiddly and a bit slow to play, and kind of one of the things, and now you're asking me about Phoenix Point. Now I'm talking about the XCOM reboots again. But one of the things the reboots do so well, right, is the way it captures the things that were happening in your head when you were playing XCOM in 1994, and it makes them text, right? It puts them on the screen, and so all of the little animations and sort of cutscenes, these little micro cutscenes that, you order a soldier to jump through a window, and you get, a 3-second cutscene of your soldier kind of vaulting herself through the window and smashing through the glass, right? Or, a critical, like, low percentage shot that you take against an alien on the other side of the map, and it hits, and you get this animation of watching that unfold. That injected so much drama into what was actually a pretty slow-paced, right, turn-based game. And XCOM doesn't feel slow. I think the reboot XCOMs don't feel slow because they accentuate those dramatic moments and create so much tension. And Phoenix Point, because it's so, I think, rooted in that 1994 design, it feels less dramatic and more cerebral, and just a bit slower and fiddlier. And for me, it just kind of shows you that you can't go home again, right? I mean, uh, you can't do a game from 1994 now and expect people to. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's lots of people that love Phoenix Point, but I think it's kind of undeniable that it didn't quite capture the same level of success as XCOM, and that's just because it's just not a contemporary game, and it's a shame because I'd love to play more Julian Gollop games, and I'm sure there will be more Julian Gollop games, but I'm hoping he can borrow a bit more inspiration from what the Firaxis guys have done if he's going to do another turn-based tactical game.
What else do you like about XCOM that we've not discussed so far?
Man. What don't I like? I mean, I think the aesthetics and the design of the universe, I think, are so appealing, right? The vehicles, which are fanciful but feel kind of grounded, the big chunky weapons that probably aren't terribly realistic, but because they're big and chunky, it's very easy to tell at a glance. Just looking at your soldiers, kind of what they got. The look and feel of the game to me it's just iconic, right? It's probably not a beautiful game, 94 XCOM. Like, it's so garish, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of unifying aesthetic that ties together the aliens, which are all so disparate from one another. But that to me is part of the charm. So I love that. The music is fantastic, just absolutely fantastic, like bar none. The Battlescape soundtracks are frightening and full of tension, and the sound design of the game in general, I think for the time, is just sensational, right? One of the great things that the game does is it blacks out your screen when it's the enemy's turn, and you only get flashes of what the enemy is doing when they come within visual range of your soldiers. So that creates this wonderfully tense sort of fog of war, right? So as soon as you hit end turn, there's that really ominous music playing, and you have what is essentially a black screen with some key art on it. And you hear the aliens, right? You hear footsteps. You hear weapons being fired. If you're in a terror site, you hear the screams of the civilians as the aliens kill them, and you can't see anything. And then when you do see something, it's surprising and shocking and unexpected. Like that, all of that, I think, is kind of a melange of the sound design and some really clever thinking about how turns work and the music and all, and the aesthetic, and I could talk for a long time about the game, man. It's really great.
To use your own words, then, what didn't you like about it?
I mean, in 1994, nothing. In 1994, I thought it was the greatest game ever made, and I thought it was perfect. In 2021, I still go back and play it, so there's a wonderful... So if you buy original XCOM on Steam or GOG, and you can then download Open XCOM, which is an open source project that attempts to insert some modern conveniences into the UI, higher screen resolutions and a few kind of common sense quality of life improvements that the original devs never had a chance to make. So I go back and I play Open XCOM, probably a couple of times a year. And now I play it and I think, it's a bit tedious moving 14 guys around the battlefield one at a time. It's a bit... I know that if I'm going to sit down and play XCOM for an hour, I'm going to play maybe one mission. right? And I know there's going to be a big investment of time, and there's a bit of a slog there, but I remember it so fondly, and I'm so attached to it that I do it, and I have a great time, right? But I think its flaws are apparent now, only in comparison to what has followed it and what was inspired by it. I think to call those things flaws kind of at the time would have been unfair.
So, top three XCOM games. What would they be? Obviously, 94 XCOM at the top. If I had to guess, it would be something like XCOM 2012 in second, and then XCOM 2 in third, right?
I mean, I don't know. I think XCOM 2
Ooh.
probably XCOM 2 probably competes for the top slot, if you ask me.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to make an entirely different episode here, if so.
It really does. It really does. I mean, it's really sensational. I mean, the so original XCOM obviously I think is it's right up there and quite possibly kind of the undisputed champ. XCOM 2 is I think close. 2012 XCOM I think is inferior to XCOM 2, if only because XCOM 2 introduces so many kind of quality of life improvements and user experience improvements that it's actually hard to go back to 2012 XCOM for me, because the whole time I'm playing it I think, this would be easier in XCOM 2, that would be easier in XCOM 2. So XCOM 2 I think is probably better than 2012 XCOM. And then Chimera Squad I have a lot of time for. It's really excellent. It's very different. It's almost it's XCOM meets Into the Breach, but in a way that I find incredibly compelling. It's super good. And then kind of from the original series, sort of XCOM Terror from the Deep. I know a lot of XCOM fans love it. I find it deeply tedious to play. It's the Gollups had nothing to do with it. Microprose just kind of took it off their hands and handed it to another creative team to do. And you can tell, right? Like it exacerbates the flaws of XCOM in a way that is super unflattering, right? Like if the problem with original XCOM is that it's slow, Terror from the Deep says, okay, now missions are going to be 2 to 3 times longer and bigger, right? Like there would be cruise ship missions where you would spend an hour clearing the first deck of the cruise ship, and then you'd get to the bottom of the first deck and it would open up the next layer, the engineering part of the cruise ship, and then that's another hour, right? So yeah, Terror from the Deep is bad. Pretty much every Microprose XCOM game after that, you might as well just forget. XCOM Enforcer, XCOM Interceptor, I played maybe once for 20 minutes. All those other ones are trash. But yeah, original XCOM, XCOM 2, right up there neck and neck. And then I'd say XCOM 2012 and then Chimera Squad. But that's not a knock on Chimera Squad because it's really good.
Honorable mentions. Go for it.
Crusader Kings 2. Crusader Kings 3 might eclipse that at some point. Loved that game. It is sort of a combination of a strategy game and an RPG in a way that I think had never been done before, and I think probably still quite hasn't been done by anybody else. Just fantastic, wonderful game. Paradox's best game, bar none, I think. And that's saying something because a lot of Paradox games are just wonderful. I think Battle Brothers is a nice successor to the XCOM formula by Overhyped Games. Came out a couple of years ago. Just wonderful stuff. Preserves a lot of those aspects of XCOM that we all loved while making them a bit more accessible, and adding its own twist to the formula. So love that. Football Manager, I freaking love Football Manager. That's got to be up there. I have. I I really, really kind of deeply loved Ghost of Tsushima last year. Spent a lot of time with that. Kind of see that it has a lot of flaws, but sort of loved it anyway. I grew up watching samurai movies with my dad, so that really that game kind of spoke to me.
And like your Twitter avatar as well, it's basically Kurosawa anyway, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that's Toshiro Mifune
Oh, okay.
from yeah, but from Yojimbo, a Kurosawa film.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody came up to me at, yeah, I guess it was EGX a couple of years ago. Well, yeah, the one you and I talked at. Somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you're Fernando Rizo." I said, "God, how do you know that?" He said, "Oh, well, you look just like your Twitter avatar." And I thought that's the greatest compliment anyone has ever given me, because it's not remotely true, right? This guy thought that picture of Toshiro Mifune was me, which, oh my God, if only. Yeah, I mean those are definitely all, like, I know this sounds silly coming from somebody who works in the games industry, but I just love games, and I play a lot of them, and I have played a lot of them, and to make a definitive list of my favorites, I would struggle, because there's so much wonderful stuff out there. I could go on and on. FTL, Into the Breach, City Skylines, like, there's Dishonored. I love Dishonored. I bought Dishonored 2 in the Steam Lunar New Year sale, and I'm putting an hour in here and there whenever I can. Really enjoying that. So yeah. So much great stuff.
There is actually one franchise that I'm quite surprised that you've not mentioned yet. That is
What's
quite
that?
considerable in its absence, because it was the other game you were sort of thinking upon yourself on what to talk about, and that was Civilization.
Oh yeah. Well, no, yeah. I mean, that's it, right? Like, I guess no list I make could be really complete. Yeah, no, I mean, Civ would be up there too, right? And then if you asked me to pick which Civ, I would really struggle.
What was it you mentioned to me? I think it was Civ 4, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Civ 4. It's funny, right? Because I think Civ 4 it's a near contemporary of the original XCOM, isn't it? And I probably feel similarly about it, in that I recognize now that it's probably not as accessible as 5 or 6, but I still fire it up every once in a while. And there are some things that 4 does that 5 and 6 simply just don't do, and kind of unlike XCOM versus the reboot XCOMs, I think there's actually some ways in which Civ 4 is probably clearly superior, I think, to 5 and 6. Not to take anything away from 5 and 6, because they're both great. Yeah. Don't get me started on Civ, or we'll have to do a whole other podcast. Yeah.
You know what? Maybe down the line I might just bring you back to do an entire Civilization episode. No.
Oh man. Well, come back to the well if you do. I've got plenty to say about it.
Top 3 games ever. What would they be? Obviously, XCOM 94 at the top. What would be 2 and 3?
Oh Lord. Oh man. Yeah, I think if you put a gun to my head, I think I would probably say Civ 4 is number 2. And then I'm going to play completely against type here and come entirely out of left field and tell you that number 3 would probably be Rocket League.
Wait, what? That is literally out of
Yeah.
left field.
So look, I know that I'm a strategy games guy, and I founded a strategy games publisher, but I'm a real omnivore when it comes to games, and I think if I had an accounting of the actual hours I had spent playing games over the last 10 years, I think Rocket League would be pretty close to the top. I've put over the years, I put a lot of time into Rocket League. I haven't played much in the last few months, really, but I adore it. I adore it, and it was a game that I cared about getting good at. and I don't think I ever really did, because probably because I'm too old and slow. But yeah, no, I that's another game I just absolutely adore, and just in terms of the amount of joy I've extracted from it, it's got I think it's almost certainly in my top three. Yeah.
God, I think I need to go back and play Rocket League again because it's been so long. I just want to see the night and day difference it's now become, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like the core kind of moment to moment experience of it is still, I think, fundamentally the same, which is fine because it's perfect, right? All the metagame stuff around it has definitely evolved, and the sort of non-game part of it, right, with the the way the shop works and the crates and all that stuff. That's all obviously changed, and probably for the better. But the core, car soccer it's great. It's really good.
The way you call it car soccer, I just basically call it Top Gear football at this point.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that too. Yeah, I mean, definitely, come check out what we're doing at Modern Wolf. We're at modernwolf.net. We've got a Twitter account. We've got an Instagram account. We released 3 really good games last year. All got tons of positive reviews on Steam. Necronator Dead Wrong. Astronauts, which is still in early access. A noir spaceship life sim from the creator of Neo Scavenger. Cosmocrats, which came out on PC in November, but it's coming to Switch very soon. And we've also got Rogue State Revolution. I don't know when you're going to air this thing.
I would say probably around April-ish time.
Oh, in April. Well, so if you're going to put this up in April, then Rogue State Revolution has just been released at a date that at this point in time, we haven't announced yet, but it's coming out very soon and is already available to buy if you're listening to this now. So yeah, Rogue State Revolution, it's a game that borrows from Civilization a lot. It borrows from City Builders. It's a political strategy game where you're the president of a fictional Middle Eastern country and trying to balance the needs of all of the different groups in your country, satisfy your neighbors or don't, deal with global powers like the US and China and Russia, and kind of forge the best future you can for your country. And then you'll probably lose, and then you could start over. And it's got a bit of a roguelike sort of loop to it. We're calling it the first political roguelike, which probably doesn't make sense to people, but it's a fantastic game, and we're really proud of it and really excited about it. So that's the thing you should all go run and purchase if you're listening to this, Rogue State Revolution. My own personal stuff, I mean, you could follow me on Twitter. I'm Chomsky, Choomsky. I do a lot of bad dad jokes, and that's basically it. And retweet Modern Wolf a lot. But yeah, that's me.
I just double checked. It is going to be around April time you get out. I think around towards the end of April, anyway. So
Perfect.
Yeah, April 21st. Yes.
Good. Well, go buy Rogue State Revolution on PC and go buy Cosmocrats on Switch.
Thanks for listening to My Favorite Game, a podcast by Play Diaries where people in the games industry come on to talk of their favorite game. If you want to listen to future episodes of My Favorite Game or press play before they go live publicly, please consider subscribing to our $2 tier on Patreon at patreon.com/playdiaries. Next week, Victoria Tran on Undertale. And then the week after that, Kitty Crawford on Undertale. Yes, for the first time in the show's history, 2 separate guests will talk of the same game in the one season across the next 2 weeks. It's gonna be fun. For more details, visit playdiaries.com/myfavouritegame. Until next week, bye bye.